Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and happy Global Clinical Engineering Day. Thank you all for attending our webinar today. We're going to have three wonderful speakers talking to us about their careers within clinical engineering. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So my name is Victoria Kidgel. I'm a clinical scientist working at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, and I'm the chair of the Clinical Engineering Special Interest Group. And we're going to be hosting the webinar today with IPEM. Just some housekeeping things before we start. So the webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the IPEM Conferences YouTube channel following today's session. Excuse me. You will also receive a link after the webinar to receive the feedback survey. So if you could fill that in. If I could also ask everyone to keep their microphones on mute, please, throughout the webinar. We're going to be using Slido for Q&A. So we're going to show you the link in a moment. So if you can add any questions that you've got for our speakers into the chat, and we'll have a session for Q&A at the end. Okay, so there's the Slido link. So I'll just give you a moment to get all that. Okay, and if we can move on to the next slide, please. Brilliant, and I'm going to hand over to my first speaker, who's Stephanie Warren.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Warren. I'm a clinical technologist at the University Hospital Trust Southampton. I also am not allowed to take control of this slideshow, so I can't actually move the slides on. Sorry, IPEM, can you help? Thank you. I wanted to have a quick look through my journey into clinical engineering. I started my career doing drama studies, which sounds like a very different route, and it kind of is. My entire family has worked in the NHS for many generations, mostly within nursing roles. So it never really occurred to me that there was an opportunity to be in the NHS in any means other than clinical, and I really can't do clinical. As I said, at university, I studied drama, which allows me to utilize my ability to communicate with different people from different ranges of authority, from matrons to cleaning staff. I managed to adapt my speech and use my degree in ability to communicate with people, except for that last sentence, which didn't really make much sense. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. I can't see it, so I'm going to go with my sheet because I can't actually read what my PowerPoint is. Sorry, I'm having difficulties today. So when I started in the hospital, I started as a ward clerk. That gave me a very clear view on how the clinical areas are run. From there, I progressed into an admin role within the workshop, looking after the management of equipment coming in, coming out. These two aspects have allowed me to have a different sort of perspective on medical equipment. I've seen the nurses running around because something's been dropped. I've seen the devices coming in and know how they're booked and managed from an administration point of view, which I feel is very important. From the workshop, I was then offered a level 3 MVQ. I started the MVQ in the workshop, learning about the policies and the procedures. The MVQ is very grounding. It does everything from policies and procedures to how to fix equipment. It's also very broad. So in our trust, we're not certain bandings can work with certain pieces of equipment. As an MVQ, you learn everything from syringe drivers to anesthetic machines. But being a level 3 MVQ, you can't actually work on anesthetic machines, but it's really interesting and makes me want to work on anesthetic machines. So coming that way, I developed a strong sense of the device life cycle, the policies in place, health and safety. There is a lot of health and safety, as I think you're all aware. Health and safety runs our lives. And then from having completed the MVQ, I was offered a place on a degree apprenticeship. Is my second degree. I think that's my next slide. Next slide. Yes, I still can't read it, but I can look at the pretty pictures. Enjoy the pretty pictures. Sorry, I'm messing this all up. I did my BSc in medical devices. It's a very interesting course. We did it during COVID, which meant we were very remote. Even when we were supposed to be physically there, we were very remote. But it has allowed me to make friends and contacts with engineers across the country of all levels, whether we had some people who needed the degree even though they'd been in the field for a long time. We had people who were just starting out. You had people like me who was learning what the whole thing was about, learning that I can, and this is the one that really got me about clinical engineering, I can help people without having to deal with ill people. I fully empathize for real people. I cannot deal with them. I just cry. But I can help look after and give back to a society that is given so much by working with medical equipment, which I think is very important. Our department has, in its small way, started to try and progress the clinical engineering message and brand out. We were took part in a documentary called Edge of Life. You may have seen it. One of our team leaders was in it. I was on it for like 3 seconds. It's very cool. The, we do a lot of events. We're trying to do more activities. I personally feel that part of the being an engineer is not just fixing the equipment, it's working with the hospital, trying to create a more homogeneous unit. Don't think I've pronounced that right. I feel it's very important. It's not just us versus them. We are together. We are a team, both the engineering department, the hospital, and the NHS as a whole. We are a team and we need to work together. And that's one of the things that I've learned a lot in this job. We can't work in isolation. We must work together. So we are incorporating, I have been involved in creating videos to train clinical staff about clinical engineering. I have been working to create leaflets to tell areas about what clinical engineering does and how we can support them. Next slide. So moving on from that, how I see my career progressing, there is a lot of talk about the STP, the Scientist Training Program, which is fascinating and would be an interesting thing to go on. But I have decided to start developing within a research role. I feel that clinical engineering in the future plays a major role within research and developing systems that can help support the trust. If we work together with other clinical areas, we can reduce the costs of the NHS, which would save costs, obviously, would help the NHS so much. But we have to think outside our rigid structure and start thinking about what can we do for you and what can you do for us. So I'm in that role. I'm taking on a master's in research, putting forward one of my ideas for interprofessional working, which I believe in very strongly. There is the clinical scientist, which is what you get at the end of an STP. Once I have a master's, there is the possibility I could apply for accreditation as a clinical scientist. I meet all the requirements except for a master's. And there is always further growth. This hospital, and as far as I'm aware, most hospitals are very keen on developing their staff. There's training, there's loads of new equipment always coming out. There's the continuous growth of clinical engineering into a range of fields such as AI supported treatment, medical programming, 3D printing. We're constantly growing and we're constantly learning. And I feel that is very important. Is that my last slide? No, I think I've got one more. Yeah, thank you. I hope that wasn't too rambling. And I'm going to pass you over now to Emily, who's going to talk about her career.
Thank you, Steph. That was really good. I really echo on your message of how we need to work as a system as a whole, rather than working in isolation, which, you know, sometimes we're all in a danger of doing. So I am struggling to take control of the slides, so I wonder if someone could progress. Thank you. Yeah, so hi everyone, nice to see so many people who's joined. And so today I'm going to share a bit about my story, how I kind of got to clinical engineering, and some projects that I've worked on in my early career. So I'm Emily Kwong. I'm a senior clinical engineer at Guy's and St Thomas Hospital. So I'm currently preparing my portfolio to register as a clinical scientist via the ACS Route 2. So I hope that you'll find this this presentation interesting and useful. Next slide, please. So firstly, a little bit about clinical engineering at Guy's and St Thomas's. So we're a very large trust. We're based in London, so probably one of the largest trusts in the country. And we consist of 5 different hospitals and community services across Lambeth and Southwark councils. And so the clinical engineering team there is responsible for managing equipment across the entire trust. So of course it's challenging, but we're a big team. So next slide, please. This is a bit of a busy slide that we often use to showcase the team that we are. So I'm here kind of in the R&D part at sort of 2 o'clock on the clock face. I don't know whether you can see my mouse. So yeah, we're a really large team, and I mainly work on innovation, R&D, and technology evaluation, and I lead the technology evaluation work stream within the clinical engineering department, as well as working on approving R&D devices that come through the trust. So I'll talk a bit about, what that's about later. But as you can see, we all work as part of a really large team, which has lots of functions across the entire trust. So next slide, please. So about me, I'm a biomedical engineer by training. So I studied biomedical engineering at the University of Sheffield. So these 4 pictures here I've chosen are ones that I feel are most representative of the kind of projects that I worked on throughout my early career, which I'll kind of go into a bit about now. Next slide, please. So the very first research project I was involved in was my final year project in my master's degree, where I created a 2D model of stress and strain of a bone hip implant interface. So back then I was really fascinated by computational research when I was in university. And because I feel like it was such a powerful way to experiment and learn how things interact with each other. And for my project, I created a very theoretical model of how these stresses and strains would work at these interfaces, with many clinically unrealistic assumptions. But nonetheless, it was a model that I created, with the help of my supervisor, and I was very proud of it. And I managed to get it published in the International Journal of Fracture. So at that point, I was really enjoying doing academic research, and I felt like I was ready to take on bigger problems. So next slide, please. So after that, I went on to take a job as a research assistant in the Department of Iron Vision Science at the University of Liverpool. So the Iron Vision Science department then was a really interdisciplinary research department. So in the department, there were clinicians, scientists, engineers, all working together to help improve eye science. And the PR of the project that I was working on started a retinopathy research center in Malawi. And then we were receiving images of patients suffering from malaria retinopathy. So this is where the malaria parasites form clumps which block blood vessels in the eye, and therefore causing blindness, and often in children. And so my job there was to archive the images that we received from the center and develop image processing and segmentation algorithm to pick out areas where the blood flow wasn't reaching. So hopefully to quantify how severe the disease was. So this project really gave me kind of a taste of working with real world data and how messy it could be. So I really learned a lot there. I learned, a bit about how to develop algorithm. I learned about image processing, and more importantly, the importance of good data quality, and how we and what we need to do to kind of deal with, poor data. And and above all, I learned to work with clinicians and also other scientists and work in a collaborative team, which was quite different to, working alone in a research project during my master's. But as I was working on these algorithms, I kind of couldn't really see how, an algorithm like that, that we have just within the research group could really go on to help patients. I couldn't see how it could eventually had a clinical impact. So I kind of wanted to do something that would allow me space to do more discovery. So this is when I decided to go on to do a PhD. So next slide, please. So when I was working on eye images, often the eye, they say, is a window to the brain. So that kind of got me quite interested in the brain. And at the time, I kind of still wasn't quite done with computational modeling. I was still fascinated by it. So that's when I decided to go and do a PhD in neuromechanics at the University of Oxford. So there, my PhD was about creating a model for coupling the mechanics and electrophysiology for axons. And this is all under the context of traumatic brain injury. And this time around, I learned a lot about not only computational modeling, but I learned a lot about the cell and tissue mechanics and how tissues could have different material properties and viscoelasticity, and is a very dynamic thing to model. And at the same time, I also learned about the pathology of traumatic brain injury and how neuroelectrophysiology changes over the course of damage. And all of this knowledge has only made me more aware of the inability of capturing all of these dynamics with my computational model. So it really gave me lots of problems, and I thought a lot about the type of thing that I should model and the kind of experiments that I needed to look at to validate my computational model. But at my Viva, my examiner asked me, well, so what? So what, you've created this model. How is this going to help a clinician? And it was sort of a moment where I just completely went blank. And because I don't know, I just don't even know how people manage these things in a hospital. I don't know how this tool could be helpful to patients or clinicians. So next slide, please. So with that kind of big question mark in my mind, I was hoping to pivot my research experience to work on something that's more translational. So I took up a postdoc post not too far from my PhD, and I was developing a smart mouth guard, which has wearable sensors for athletes. Hoping that, this is a project that will have more application in real life. And I really enjoyed this project. I was leading a team of scientists and engineers, and we developed prototypes of mouth guards and processing algorithms, and we were collecting real world data, and we worked really closely with coaches and athletes. And we also navigated through medical device regulations, and we set up QMS for the prototypes that we made. So I've learned, at the same time, I learned a lot about, how to commercialize technology from a university, including the kind of IP you need to consider and investment life cycle that comes with commercializing a technology. But then all of a sudden, when I was enjoying all this project, COVID hit. And suddenly that big question mark came up again, and it really kind of sunk in for me. And I was faced with the reality of not understanding how my work is truly relevant to patients and clinicians. So next slide, please. So at this point, I was thinking to myself, I've, really worked on a variety of projects, all biomedical related. So throughout my career, unlike some researchers who's really specialized in a specific topic, I've kind of just looked and worked on projects that I liked the look of and enjoyed, and I didn't really specialize in anything. So I was a bit of a jack of all trades. So I didn't know what I could be good for, and I was trying to find somewhere where I could use all the research skills that I have kind of gathered over my early career And that's when I found clinical engineering. Next slide, please. So this is, so now I've been a clinical engineer for over 3 years. So this is just an overview of some of the projects, example projects and organizations that I work on. So on top of my day-to-day tasks supporting medical devices and ensuring safety of devices coming to the trust through R&D, I get to work on lots of different projects and with lots of different organizations. So some examples, I won't go through all of them. So asset tracking, so that's an ongoing project where our trusts are trying to experiment installing RFID infrastructure to better track where the devices are within the hospital. And then the one next to it, Tideman Tube, and that's the medical device that the trust is commercializing, and it's a device to help birth of babies during C-section. And clinical engineering was we helped with shaping the QMS and kind of commercialization strategy of this device throughout the project. And the HEAR-RT project, the HEART project, is a national health economics analysis that I was working with KITEC, which is the King's Technology Evaluation Centre on. And this is a project looking at the kind of landscape of implementing auto contouring in radiotherapy treatment planning, and whether there are opportunities there for, and how different departments could use technologies like this or improve the rollout of this technology. So as you can see, these are just some examples, and compared to my early career, I was working with on a lot of different projects at the same time, and at the same time with many organizations. And these are just a kind of a handful of examples that I've chosen. And some of these projects that I have shared here, I got to work on because I took a secondment with KITEC, which is the King's Technology Evaluation Centre. And I'll talk about a project that I worked with them in more detail slightly later. But for now, I just want to take a pause from talking about work. And next slide, please. Because I think often in these career talks, it's very easy to just talk about all the work that we do. But I think actually what's really important and often get forgotten is other aspects of life that I think is important. Also for everyone at every stage of career, especially if you're in your early career. So I think it's very important to find a work-life balance. So this is my personal experience. So when I was in academia, I did find it a little bit difficult to strike a good work-life balance. And this was completely different for me when I joined clinical engineering. I'm working in a really supportive team, and I feel that I have both more time at work, and I'm more productive at work, and I also have more time for my home life. So meanwhile, after joining clinical engineering, I got married, I started a family, and we're currently a family of 5 with a toddler and 2 cats. And the cats actually feature sometimes quite heavily in meetings when I'm working remotely. So I was also able to take advantage of the shared parental leave scheme in my trust, and also that my partner's workplace offer. And we were able to share our kind of early parenting duties until my son went to nursery. So I highly recommend this option for anyone in this situation. But for now, we'll go back to talking about work. Next slide, please. So yes, KITEC. So as I said, the real world usage of the patch versus the Holter monitor. And we worked with stroke units at North Bristol, NHS Trust, and also Southampton General. And we looked at the clinical effectiveness, pathway efficiencies, health economics, and the implementation across these 2 sites. And overall, we found that the Zio patch exhibited a much higher diagnostic yield and required fewer repeated tests. So clinically, it was more effective in those sense. And the Zio surface also, we found that they reduced time in different areas. So for example, in fitting appointments, and also in the time that patient received diagnosis and treatment. So overall, for remote monitoring or for patients who require longer term monitoring, Zio patch was working much better. And above all, patients and clinicians both have a preference working with Zio Patch because for their ease of use and also for their clinical effectiveness. So this is one example of the kind of research that kind of clinical engineering do alongside other organizations such as KaiTech. So next slide, please. So my time and secondment with KaiTech has sort of helped me to pivot my previous research skills into applying it to a clinical setting and looking at real-world evaluation. And there are actually lots of opportunities for research in clinical engineering, and so this is where kind of my skills became useful. My previous research skills became useful, and I now ended up leading the technology evaluation and research workstream in the department. So other areas of research that we're currently excited about at the moment is how technologies might be used in people's homes, so especially in the context of virtual wards, and how poor usage and poor usability could actually lead to problems, diagnostic errors, and also incidents. So our team has developed a framework for analyzing usability of medical devices that we have published on. And we also work really closely, and we organize lots of workshops to work with patient representatives to understand their point of view as an end user of the whole system. And we're currently looking to do more in this space and expand kind of our capability in this space. And we hope to set up testing sessions with patient representatives to get a better understanding of how usability can really lead to ultimately problems clinically. So this is just a kind of example of the type of research that we get into. So next slide, please. And so another thing that I just wanted to share is recently we've had a visit from Baroness Merron, who's the health minister, and also Henrietta Hughes, who's a patient safety commissioner. And so we've had the opportunities to present our research that clinical engineering does that's relating to improving patient safety. So it was a really it was an honor to kind of represent the department and present the work we do. So it was just an exciting opportunity that I had. Next slide, please. So yeah, finally, to wrap up, so for those who are interested anyway, so I'm personally in the final stages of preparing my portfolio to register as a clinical scientist via the Route 2 method. So just a few things that I kind of want to share of what I found that you might find useful. So on the ACS website, there are some example portfolios, but I haven't found anything that's very specific to clinical engineering, which is a bit disappointing. So in my quest to kind of find out more information, I got in touch with IPEM, and I managed to speak to an assessor who's a clinical engineer, and it seems that there's no one size fits all in terms of what they want and the kind of experience that the amount and the type of experience that you need. It fundamentally, it seems that they want to assess whether you're a scientist with strong reasoning and scientific rigor. So that was kind of quite useful for me when I was preparing my portfolio to try and shape my experience to reflect that. And at the same time, another pointer is I felt that because I haven't done the STP scheme, I felt that my exposure to the different types of clinical services were more limited compared to some of my colleagues. So when the opportunity does arise, I do try to embrace it and try to really expand into, into work beyond my day-to-day role, just to get a little bit more exposure. And so that way of working did get me a secondment with KaiTech, which is beyond my day-to-day role, which I guess in a way led to the role that I'm doing now. So I guess you never know what different opportunities will lead you to. And on this note, I'll wrap up and I'll hand over to John.
Thanks very much, Emily. That was very interesting. It's only a different route to mine. So I'm John Renshaw. I'm a senior clinical engineer at Nottingham University Hospitals NHS Trust, which is a large trust comprising of 2 large hospitals in Nottingham. I'm an electrical and electronics specialist as part of the wider engineering team within our busy clinical engineering department. Since I've been in post, I've been involved with electrical and electronic aspects of manufacturing projects in our in-house manufacturing facility, and involved with novel product prototypes built for research purposes, and the adaptation of new technologies in the trust, as well as doing an MSc in biomedical engineering part-time at Keele. I've been in post 3 years, so that's been quite a lot, quite a rapid amount of work to take on. All in all, it's very varied work, a bit like my route to actually get here, which is possibly not the most usual, and I wasn't sure whether it was too unusual to describe here, but I think you may find it useful. So after I left school, I started with a craft electronics college course, which was a mix of fundamental electronic theory and practical work. Built various pieces of electronic equipment whilst there, including a variable bench power supply from scratch, including the case and all the electronics inside. After that, I was fortunate to get a work placement at an electronics company. This electronics company, Spectre Luminex, they make large 100-volt PA amplifier systems for large buildings, and also explosion-proof beacons for oil platforms. My post there was to test the equipment that was built straight off the production line and make sure it worked okay. And if it didn't work, fault find to work out what was wrong with it and rectify it, usually something assembled wrong or solder in the wrong place on the circuit boards. After a year there, that company had a lull in orders, and unfortunately I was made redundant, and the electronics manufacturing industry was also having a very lean patch. So I took a job in retail to tide me over, which gave me another range of skills which I hadn't really identified or gone into before, which was people skills, interacting with people, talking to people on a daily basis, the selling and discussion and finding out what people are actually trying to obtain, which is really useful in engineering, because when you're building your requirements, which is the key principle behind when you're starting to design a project for somebody, that's one of the key factors of that, which is interacting with the people who are going to use it, or the clinicians that are going to put that into use. So not directly relatable, but actually more transferable skills, which I found useful later on. So working in retail made it difficult for me to continue my studies in electronics, which I really wanted to do. I was working till 8 o'clock some nights, and the only way I could get onto the course I wanted to get onto was by doing evening courses. So I looked for another post in electronics, and I found one at an antenna manufacturer in Nottingham called Grade UK. Now on my slide there, you might see a strange UFO shaped thing. That's one of the antennas. It's an amplified omnidirectional antenna, and it's actually a TV and radio antenna, but it's often used on caravans and boats. It was interesting work involving solving customer problems, both at the premises in Nottingham and at customer locations. This involved working with a subcontracted electronics manufacturer to test prototype products, which I did in the Peak District during the winters, which was our quietest time. So that gave us time for R&D and development, and taking antennas around the Peak District to various small transmitter masts to test their effectiveness. With this post came the opportunity to continue my studies. So now I was working 9 till 5, I could start my evening studies again. And that drive was always part of getting to where I am, I think, because if you have that drive and you're determined to get somewhere, you will find a way to do it. So I started the evening course, which was an ONC, then an HND, which could then be taken on to BSc at my local college. And whilst I was working at this post, I saw an advert for a technician post in the medical physics department at the Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham. And that's when I moved into the NHS for the first time. And I really wasn't aware, like others, that there was such a a support infrastructure in the background behind all the clinical teams that's keeping all of the equipment moving, keeping it all working, maintaining and keep it safe for everybody. Here in this department, the medical physics department was responsible for a very, very wide variety of equipment, and including repairing and maintaining computing equipment for the trust. This was very early days in the computers, and we originally had a large VAX mainframe computer and terminals, but then they started getting PCs, and we were involved in repairing those for IT. We looked after medical lasers, surgical lasers, and any equipment that was brought to us, really. We looked at, reverse engineered, worked out how it worked, and liaised with manufacturers, if the manufacturer was still in existence, to try and work out how to repair it. So that was all that extremely useful learning experience, because you're learning hands-on, you're learning the theory, you're learning the practicalities all the way through. I managed to continue my part-time studies there and eventually achieved a BSc in electronic engineering. And I progressed as a technician in medical physics there until I couldn't see a way to proceed any further. And after a period of time, an opportunity arose at Rolls-Royce Marine Power in Derby as an engineer in their busy electrical controls and instrumentation department. Now on the slides there's a picture of a submarine. Now, this is very interesting work, supporting the fleet of existing and in-build submarines and working on various test and research facilities. It was mainly electronics based, some of it old analog electronics, some of it modern digital electronics. It was all very interesting. I can't go into too much detail regarding this work, however, but I did end up in some very interesting places during my work there. But again, I did learn a lot of engineering project work and safety engineering principles, more useful transferable skills. You don't know when you're going to, you might not think that if you do move into a different post, maybe not even in the same field, that those skills will be usable later on, but a lot of it is all transferable and you'll find it useful later. I got to a point working on those projects where I was looking for another challenge and a way perhaps to use my engineering skills to enhance people's lives. And so, with my newly gained industrial experience, I considered heading back into clinical engineering, this time as a clinical engineer. And fortuitously, around the same time, an opportunity appeared in Nottingham, and I was fortunate to be able to take up the post. And I've been in this post for 3 years. So over time, all of the experience in all of those different posts and courses has been really useful to build the skills to enable me to do the job that I do today. And it's important to remember that wherever you go, you pick up lots of transferable skills that open routes that would otherwise be difficult to navigate. In our work, we work with many clinical disciplines. And as Steph and Emily have mentioned, it is vital to work as a team to break this new ground. If you work in a silo, you're not going to get the understanding of what the clinical team wants. If you're trying to work with them to develop a new product, for example, something that's going to help a patient in a new way that isn't available off the shelf currently. Since starting this post, I've carried out the part-time MSc. It's been a useful bridge, bolstering my physiological, medical device regulation and engineering knowledge. It was difficult to start, as I started during the end of the COVID restrictions, which meant lots of remote working. But the second year, it was more of a normal studying experience, and that was much better. So I think that's it from me. If anyone's got any questions, I think we've got a Q&A coming up on, I'm not sure the platform, but yes, so that's all from me, and over back to Victoria.
That's brilliant. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for your wonderful talks. I've certainly found them incredibly interesting, and I think hopefully the audience will find them quite inspirational. I've got some themes from you that sort of run through your all three presentations of it doesn't really matter what background you've got, there is a way into clinical engineering, and I think that's something that's really important for younger people to understand, is that there are many different routes into clinical engineering, and it's more than acceptable to change your career path as you go through life, and also about utilising those transferable skills that you get from all your different projects as well, and the different experiences that you have. So our questions are open now on Slido, so if anyone does have any questions, please post them in. So we've had one question already. So the question is, have any of you suffered from imposter syndrome? And if so, any tips for overcoming it? So if I can ask all our speakers to put their cameras back on and their microphones back on, and we'll ask you one at a time. And I think we'll go through in the order that you spoke. So Steph, if you would like to answer first.
I suffer from imposter syndrome a lot of the time. One of the best ways I have of countering that, and it may seem a little needy, is asking those around you. Those you work with will be able to tell whether or not you are suitable for your job. Also, you're being paid. Someone must think you can do it.
Brilliant, thanks, Steph. Can I ask you to put your microphone back down when you speak next time? You were a bit quiet that time. Emily, can we move to you?
Yeah, so I think at the beginning, I definitely felt maybe that I didn't know a lot about clinical engineering. So there was definitely quite a kind of heavy sense of, you know, do I actually know what clinical engineering is about? Because my previous background was a bit different, even though it was in a way there are lots of similarities, but in the early days, I didn't know how similar, you know, how I could pivot my skills. So I think that's when I kind of, spoke to lots of people about it. And, you know, if I'm uncertain about anything that I'm working on, I would always get a second opinion of a colleague or someone who's more experienced. And then I think over time, then you get the hang of things and you realize that actually these are decisions that you're capable of making, as long as you hold kind of, you know, good logical reasoning. So yeah, I think people do often have these things, but I think you have to just remember that, you know, you have a scientific training or background, and often that goes a long way.
Great, thank you. And John?
Yes, I can echo those sentiments also. I think when I moved into an engineering role for the first time, I certainly did. But you begin to realize, talking to other people and asking other people questions, actually that the thought process you were having actually was along the right lines, and you were thinking in the right way. So I think that then gives you the confidence, as Emily said, that you actually do have the skills, and it's that confidence. It's just building the confidence to use those skills that you developed over time. And I think that's it. It takes time to just develop into a role and then gain your confidence and then feel confident making those decisions. And the support of your colleagues around you can really make that difference.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I would echo that I think most people suffer from imposter syndrome, and it's something you need to work on, and it does take just experience, really. Okay, the next question. What is a possible route for an established technician of many years' experience to become a clinical scientist? Emily, would you like to answer this one first?
Yeah, so I think depending on your experience, I know, so, you know, route 2 is one of the way, and I think there's another scheme which is called the equivalence route that I don't know that much about. I think the route 2 might be targeted at people who's got some prior research experience. So depending on, I think depending on the kind of experience you've got, the equivalence route or the route 2 method, it's one of the ways without having to do the STP scheme.
Yes, and there's information on the IPEM website as well. They do IPEM run an equivalent scheme as well. Steph, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I haven't really had a very deep look into it. I'm still building up to that stage.
Yeah, there is a lot of resources available, and if you want to contact IPEM after the event, they can always direct you towards it. John, was there anything you wanted to add at all? Sorry.
A similar position to Steph, I think. I'm still researching this myself and going through the process, actually. So
Brilliant. Next question. What steps do you think we need to take to standardise the training of the next generation of clinical engineering technicians? John, should we go to you first?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done here, I think, because I think it's all been done in silos around the country. It would be good to have a universal set standard. I think we are heading in that direction with the types of training programs that we've got. In Nottingham, we've got an apprenticeship scheme for technicians, and that's really started. We've got 2 new technicians, apprentices currently on board, and we've just had 2 pass out from their courses, and they've got posts within the trust. So that's really good, and I think that's something that continuing that and widening that process out nationally is ideal for getting that level. For training, perhaps that would be useful to have a standardized training for people who've already been in post, because people come into technician posts from a wide variety of backgrounds. So yeah, if there's a standardized framework of standard technician training that could be accessible across the whole country, that would be ideal.
And if we go to Steph next, if there's anything you want to add?
I think part of what would be really good towards getting training is also to standardise the banding of clinical engineering across the country. At the moment, different trusts can band different engineers to do different types of equipment. There are some trusts where band 7s aren't trusted to do anything more than syringe drivers, and there are some trusts where band 3s are allowed to do diathermies. We need to standardise what each band means and what people can do before we can standardise what qualifications you need for each section.
Great, thank you. Emily, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'm afraid I don't know too much about the training for technicians. I know that our trust is trying to, work on a new course for technologists. And I suppose, maybe taking this, I assume this is already an issue being discussed by the National Clinical Engineering Network as well. I think it's very much on their agenda, the kind of future workforce training.
Yeah, absolutely. There is definitely ongoing discussions nationally with the different networks about this, because it is a big topic and definitely needs to be some standardization of it. The next question is there any clear difference between biomedical engineer and clinical engineer? So I'll pass this to Emily first of all.
Yeah, I guess having been both. So I guess in some ways there isn't a distinct difference. So I guess clinical engineer has more kind of responsibility to kind of their role within a hospital. So there are distinct things that they're responsible for, whereas biomedical engineer, I guess, is a subspecialty within engineering. So in a way, you can be a biomedical engineer and you would likely have the right skills to be clinical engineer, and possibly vice versa. If you did a clinical engineering course, you would have the same engineering skills to be a biomedical engineer elsewhere. I think the key with being a clinical engineer is having the kind of awareness of your role within the hospital and kind of your role towards patient safety and supporting the clinical services. I think that's probably one of the distinct difference. I think a clinical engineer needs to have that a biomedical engineer won't necessarily have.
John, should we move to you next?
Yeah, I think that summary that Emily's just given is correct. Really, it's the awareness of patient safety is another level as a clinical engineer. Having been both a biomedical engineer and a clinical engineer, I think that is the key difference.
And Steph, anything further you'd like to add?
I've only been a clinical engineer, so I have no idea.
Okay. I would just say as well, there does seem to be some difference as you move between trusts as to what they would call them. I've worked in trusts where they've been called biomedical engineers, and in other trusts they've been clinical engineers. So again, it would be helpful to get some standardization of the actual job role names as well. The next question, is there any career progression in clinical engineering? After senior clinical engineering, what else? So let's move to Steph first.
It kind of depends on what you want to go into. If you want to go into a more research-based program, you can stay as a clinical engineer but in a research facility. There's the quality control section. If you want to go to more towards the lifestyle management, the governance, the policies, the field safety notice, you can progress into quality control, and that's quite a interesting route to take that has several steps. You can then progress into head of department depending on how your trust is set up. If you go to head of department, you could possibly end up as director of physics, assuming your clinical engineering comes under physics. If it doesn't come under physics, there may be other pathways you can go along. It depends on your trust and what you're interested in doing, really. But yes, there is still advancement.
Move to Emily next.
Yeah, I agree with Steph. So within the department, there's definitely room to progress. I also heard of other people who's moved from clinical engineering to industry as well. People's worked and then moved on to working in consultancies. People who's then move on to work for notified bodies. So there are, I mean, I don't know whether it's direct progression, but there are definitely other routes if, kind of progression further up the trust is not what you want.
And John, any further from you?
Well, but I think it really depends on the structure of if you wanted to progress within your trust. It depends on the structure of that particular trust. I mean, the trust, clinical engineering, and medical physics departments do vary quite widely across the country. So it could be that there's not much room for movement in some trusts, but in others there's actually quite a diverse range of routes you could take. And again, as Emily says, there's also routes into industry too. So yes, always.
So we've got a comment that Swansea University are currently running a medical engineering degree, which might be a good foot in the door for some people. And I think they're also running it at other universities as well. So I'll leave the question directed to Emily to the end. So hopefully we can get a couple more questions in. Is an academic qualification such as an MSc or PhD a must for progression into a senior engineer role? So if we start off with John for this one.
It's certainly very useful, and I think you would struggle without at least an MSc in this level. There are possibly exceptions if you've got a lot of industry experience in a particular area, which could be considered in lieu of that. But really, I think you're looking at an MSc as a minimum, really, for a senior engineering role, in my opinion. I don't know whether that's it could be different in other areas, of course.
Emily, if we go to you next.
My feeling is similar to John's, but I do have a colleague who I don't believe have an MSc or PhD, but she did have lots of prior industry experience in IT. So and that's kind of her specialty here. So it really depends on your experience, but often I think it does help to have at least an MSc.
And Steph, anything you'd like to add?
I'm hoping an MRes will do just as well as an MSc.
Great. Do you have any tips on how to get involved in projects and research whilst working as a clinical engineer? If I start off with Emily, as I know you've talked a lot about your projects.
Yeah, so I guess with the way our department works, I think it's quite transparent, and the sort of projects that we kind of talk about the projects that are going on during our section meetings, and often people who are interested to get involved just come and speak to me or my boss. And so really I think showing an interest is a good start, and letting kind of your managers know that the kind of things that you want to work on is also a good start, so that they know to direct you different opportunities when they arise. I think that's a good way. And quite often we get trainees, STP trainees involved. So I don't know what kind of stage career you're in. So yeah, quite often we get trainees involved with different research projects just to give them exposure. So yeah, hopefully if you look around, there'll be opportunities there. Otherwise, often if there's an area of research that you're interested to look at, it's also one way to start. You could start a project that you have a question that you want to answer, and that's always a good start. You can speak to your manager about maybe doing a research project, and if it's a project that requires funding, that's also something you could start to look at. You could look into getting some funding to do a research project.
And if we move to Steph next.
I'd say approaching your managers and your team leader is a very good first step. Looking around to see if you've got any research bodies within your area. So our trust works very closely with a research school which do funds and courses for people within the trust, particularly healthcare science, to start us off in research. So that's a good place to start as well.
Thank you. And John, anything further from you?
In addition to that, networking really, and discussing, just talking to people in other departments, you may end up having a conversation about an idea that someone else has got to take a project forward, and that might be relevant to you, and it could be something that you could discuss with your management, and then the idea of a project might then take hold, and it could be a project going forward. So just talking to people and listening, I think, is key.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that. It's trying to build up your network and doing that whatever way you can, whether it's sort of attending events, getting involved with your professional bodies as well. Even if you could think about setting up a network yourself if there isn't one within your trust. Just get that collaboration going, let people know that you're interested and it's something that you want to do. And once you start the discussions with people, then they're aware that you'd like to be involved. So being very aware of time, and I know this question's been up for a while, so I'm going to ask it to Emily. What sort of stuff have you put down in your portfolio documents for submitting for your registration?
Yeah, so for my portfolio in particular, the assessor that I spoke to, he kind of recommended splitting my experience into kind of pre-doctoral and post-doctoral experience. So I have included everything, lots of what I've shared today, projects I've worked on, and in addition, my clinical engineering day-to-day role. And specifically, I picked out examples where I felt it reflected specific competencies that they wanted. So there's a real range of things in there. So I'd say, and also in addition to that, you have to submit evidence as well to support the kind of experience that you've described. So I think I have maybe about 40 pieces of experience that I have added in there, ranging from, the projects that I did from my master's through to, what I'm doing now, leading a work stream and the research projects that I work on. So I guess the aim is to give them a wide variety about the experience that you have about yourself, and, to show that you can work independently and scientifically as an engineer.
Brilliant. Is there any training available for if we want to go into governance? I'll ask John first.
I'm certainly not aware of any specifics, so I'll pass that on to one of my other colleagues who might be able to answer the question.
Steph?
I have seen through a work stream diagram that there is a governance training course, but I can't tell you where it is because I couldn't find it. If you do the apprenticeship degree or any of the medical engineering degrees, they do have a governance section from which you can develop further.
Thank you. And anything very quickly, Emily, that you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I guess governance is quite broad. So from my understanding of governance, which is, medical device regulations mainly, there are kind of snippets of training out there, maybe in sort of the public domain. But yeah, really is in-house training. I think quite often through the SDP scheme, we do kind of provide that training through the scheme. But I guess if your role involves governance, I think quite often you would get training on the job. So, you know, certainly I did. So.
Okay, I appreciate that we are 1 minute over time, but I just wanted to address the top comments. So what do you classify as a clinical engineer? It's a vague term and should include clinical technologists who work in MEMS departments. It's something I'm a little bit on my soapbox about with engineers right throughout my career. So clinical scientist, as you know, is a protected title. It's a registered profession, but unfortunately clinical engineer is not. And it does cover a wide variety, a really wide variety of different roles and different grades. And it does vary from trust to trust as well. So it's it's definitely something that needs to be looked at and something that we can try to lobby about. It's a very difficult subject. But if it is something that you would like to get involved in or feel strongly about, then please do contact me via the Clinical Engineering SIG, and it's something that we can look into a bit further. All of my contact details are on the IPEM Clinical Engineering SIG page, so you can contact me directly. We are at the end of the webinar now, so I am going to have to draw it to a close. If you do have any further questions, then please do email me. It's victoria.kidgel@nhs.net. And like I said, my contact details are on the CSIG page on the IPEM website. We can discuss it, and if there's anything you want for one of the specific speakers, then I can pass it on to them and we can get back to you. Just quickly, we've got some upcoming events: the Clinical and Scientific Symposium, which is going to be on the 21st of November in Leeds. Excuse me, sorry, I do have a cold, so apologies for the cough. And I think that was the last slide. So just to thank all our speakers once again for your brilliant talks and for answering all the questions. And thank you for all the participants who have attended today. It's been a really brilliant turnout, so thank you for that. And once again, happy Clinical Engineering Day, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.